Good morning, everybody. Welcome to June. This morning I'm starting work on one of my sermons this particular week. I'm working on the one for June 13th. I always tend to work a little bit in advance. But as I started working on this, a thought came to mind, and honestly, it's a thought that I have a lot when working on sermons, especially if I'm working on things for special services, kind of like, funerals especially. You're trying to figure out, what can I say that's going to really help the family? What can I say that's going to draw them closer to Christ, closer to God, for comfort in their grief? And honestly, when I'm working on stuff like this, I end up feeling like this. I've got a picture for you. Have a look at it. Yeah, you see what I mean? I just end up feeling like whatever I've put together, whatever I've done, however much I've worked on it, I look at it and just kind of feel like that cat. This is inadequate. It's not going to really do what I'm hoping it's going to do. I can see the flaws in it. We're always kind of our worst critics. You ever notice that? But finally, you can't work on something forever. You've got to go with it. So finally, I have to take comfort in one of the actions of Jesus. It's recorded in Matthew chapter 14, where it says, when it was evening, the disciples came to him and said, "This is a desolate place, and the day is now over. Send the crowds away to go into the villages and buy food for themselves." But Jesus said, "They need not go away. You give them something to eat." They said to him, "We have only 5 loaves here and 2 fish." And he said, "Bring them here to me." Then he ordered the crowds to sit down on the grass, and taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and said a blessing. Then he broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the crowds. And they all ate and were satisfied, and they took up 12 baskets full of the broken pieces left over. And those who ate were about 5,000 men, besides women and children. You probably recognize that passage. It's the very well-known feeding of the 5,000. Here they are. They're out in the middle of nowhere. Everybody's getting hungry. The disciples say, "Hey, Jesus, don't you think we ought to cut this short? Send people on home so they can get something to eat?" And Jesus says, "No, why don't you guys feed them?" See, Jesus knew what he was going to do, but the disciples didn't. So they look around, they find a kid who brought a box lunch, the good old 5 loaves, 2 fish, that type of thing. And probably not big fish, probably not big loaves of bread, probably fairly small, think dinner roll. And Jesus says, "Why don't we use this?" And everybody's thinking, are you nuts, Jesus? I mean, what are you doing here? This is a box lunch for a kid. How are we going to feed anybody more than the kid with it? Well, Jesus blesses it, and next thing you know, they fed everybody everything they wanted, and they had a ton left over. What's this have to do with our own meager efforts when it comes to serving Christ? You're probably not a preacher. You probably don't try to comfort people in the midst of tremendous grief. You probably don't get up on Sunday morning saying, "Hey, I'm going to get up in the pulpit and preach today." But look, every last one of us in serving Christ at some point takes a look at our efforts and says, "What am I going to do with this? How can I make this worthwhile, let alone successful?" Remember, we serve a God who took a box lunch and fed 5,000 people, plus the women and the children. God can do a lot with a little. If I didn't believe that, I'd have to find a new line of work. I mean, hey, I think I'm good at what I do. That's why I do it. But fact is, every last one of us finally realizes we're not perfect. We're not the 100% best there's ever been at this. And sometimes we're going to fall short at a lot of it. What can God do with this? Remember, God's God. He has the ability to take our meager offerings, to take our limited abilities, to take whatever we can bring to the table and put them to work and make them work well, even abundantly for His purposes. So, today, don't worry about whether you can be good enough, smart enough, wonderful enough for God to use you. Bring what you've got. God will put it to work. And we'll all be surprised about what God can do with our efforts. I'm going to get back to work. You probably have to get back to work too. But remember, our God is a God who can use very little and do much. Bring your little and be ready to be amazed at what kind of much He will do. Have a great day.